I'd like to talk about today is the power of numbers. And I'll introduce this topic with the words of what I think is one of the greatest organizational sociologists in the world, and that is Dilbert, who says, I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made up this one, and he writes it on the whiteboard. And then he says, studies have shown that accurate numbers aren't any more useful than the ones you make up. And then a question from the audience arises, and how many studies show that? 87. So you want a number, I'll give you a number. This is an interesting quote because it shows the obsession to some extent that we have with numbers and how numbers are used to close conversations rather than opening them up. And what I would like to do today with you is actually to show how numbers are useful for opening up conversations rather than closing them up. This, of course, is also in contrast with most of the current policies on accounting regulation, because there is a huge fixation with objectivity, measurement, and transparency. This has been quite evident especially in the Anglo-American, I have to say, in the Anglo-American attitude towards regulation in accounting. I'm Italian. I mean, until 1990, and especially when I was, I'll give you an example which possibly is more enlightening. When I was an undergraduate student in accounting, if I had gone to the exam, it was an oral exam, and if I had told my professor that the purpose of accounting is to produce true figures and numbers, the professor would have taken me like this and kicked me out of the room. Nowadays, it's the opposite, that if you go to an exam and you say that accounting cannot produce true numbers, you are kicked out of the room. So in the span of very few years, I would say, domination of the positivist and Anglo-American attitude towards accounting has been dominating, and it does dominate the regulation in this field. What is even more worrying is that the moment in which we understand that accounts have to deal with societal and environmental issues, and so with the mushrooming of these various initiatives like the Accounting for Sustainability of the Prince of Wales, the Global Reporting Initiatives, or the Integrated Reporting, this attitude towards measurement grows from the economic sphere or the financial sphere to the other spheres. So there is an enlargement of the realm of the measurement, but there is not a change in the way in which this measurement is conceived. And this is a constant feature of many of the even contemporary attempts. I sit on the advisory group of the Financial Reporting Council for rethinking corporate reporting, and I have to fight very strongly to tell the others what they know already, that is that numbers cannot produce truth. So they know it when they practice it, but they forget it when they have to make policies. Very recently, I think a week or two ago, the World Economic Forum has published a document on metrics that should become rules in order for corporations to become environmentally and socially friendly. And this reminds me my experience with the Accounting for Sustainability. I was part of this project at the very beginning, and when I was at Oxford, and there was a kind of clash between the group of researchers at Oxford and the people in the project, in particular Sir Michael Pitt, who is the P in KPMG. Because we said, look, if you want to discuss issues that concern the environment, is quite difficult to reduce the environment to a set of metrics and numbers. I think that these numbers have to play different roles, but what he wanted to do was to have a set of metrics and then make sure that these metrics could be ticked off by corporations in order to show to the public that they were environmental friendly. So we witnessed this reductionist attitude of tackling very complex issues and reducing them to numbers. Now, what I would like to do with you is to, in a sense, debunk or search for alternative to ways in which transparency can be achieved, or even moving away from this transparency and moving from what I would say positivism towards what I call negativism, and this will hopefully become clearer towards the end of this talk, because transparency, this this attitude towards seeking transparency is, as Marilyn Strathern said, presupposes what to make transparent. So if I want to account for bottles, I will only see bottles. Unfortunately, there is no bottle here, but normally with my students I make this example. I take a bottle of water, I ask them, what is this? And they say, a bottle of water. Then I turn it this way, I try to smash it on their head, and this becomes a weapon. So if you see and if you account for bottle of waters, you will only see bottle of waters. You will not be able to see that this thing has got the tendency to become what it was not, which is what Anthony Hopwood once said. So, yeah, no problem. Yeah, okay. So, just to start to make links between what I'm saying and what was said in the previous talk. What I'm getting interested in, and what I've been interested in for a few years, is the relationship between accounting and mystery. And more recently, I'm getting interested in the relationship between accounting and magic. I'm also becoming addicted to Netflix, and if you have Netflix, you may have watched The Crown, and there is a beautiful scene where there is the anointing ceremony of Queen Elizabeth II, where the Archbishop has to do a cross with the holy oil on her head, and this veil goes on the Queen's head to make that moment invisible. And this was the first ceremony that was broadcasted live on TV. And Prince Edward, who was in exile in Paris, was watching this with his friends. And one of his friends said, "Oh, now that we have got TV, everything should be made transparent. So why do they put the veil on the top of the head of the Queen?" And he responds, "Who wants transparency when you can have the magic?" Which I think is fantastic. But this will become hopefully clear why I think it's fantastic in a moment. And exactly like the previous presentation by Sylvan, I would like to go back to history to understand how alternatives are possible and how this crazy attitude towards transparency is actually a very recent attitude. As I said, until 1980, accounting was not supposed to produce true and fair views. Accounting was about judgment. Accounting was about investigating your morality. Accounting was about mystery, in a sense, as we will see. So numbers have a history, and words have a history too, but we tend to forget them. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how words have a history that could be interesting to open up new vistas on what accounting is about or was about. Does anyone know in this room why auditing is called auditing? Why do we call auditing, or why do they call auditing? Because in Italian, actually, it's not called auditing, it's called revisione, so to see things again. But auditing in English is called auditing because it comes from audire. Because if you look at medieval and early modern accounting treatises, when you had to check your accounts, you did not look at them because as a remnant of an oral culture, in the Middle Ages, people gave people trusted more the sense of hearing rather than the sense of sight. And so the rule was that when you have to check your accounts, a person has to read the accounts, and then another person has to listen to the accounts to understand whether the story, whether the account makes sense. So going back to history, opens up a different idea of what accounting is. Another interesting word is inventory. I would say that unless you are a medievalist or you are a linguist who studies rhetoric, inventory is normally associated to accounting. No one knows that actually inventory comes from inventio, which is the first canon of rhetoric. So you create spaces, you create loci, or you create topois, which then become topics, where you put things in. And then with the second canon of rhetoric, ordinatio and dispositio, you recombine this loci in order to invent new solutions to old problems, or to invent new knowledge or new understandings. There are a couple of things that I'm very proud of my academic career. The first one is that I'm possibly the world-leading expert on the administration of the Society of Jesus. And that is a very easy thing to be, because I'm the only one. So actually now there is another one in Warwick. We're working together, Joseph Bento da Silva. The second is that one of my papers on the Jesuits apparently is used by Tony Grafton in the PhD in history at Princeton. I've been told that, so I don't know whether it is true or not. But if you know that it is not true, don't tell me. It's nice to believe that it is true. And I guess that the reason why that paper is used in that PhD in history is that because I show how accounting evolves and develops as the translation of rhetoric into a new rhetoric and art of memory into a new field, which is the administration of large estates. And so there are tons of relationships in terms of terminology between accounting rhetoric and the art of memory. And why is this important? Because in the Middle Ages, rhetoric was part of the trivium, so grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So every intellectual would have been trained with the trivium. And in particular, rhetoric was an instrument to build knowledge, but also to interrogate the mystery of knowledge, but to interrogate the mystery in general. So the fact that accounting is, in a sense, derives or is the translation of rhetorical techniques is quite interesting, because it shows us how in the Middle Ages and early modern times accounting was a tool to interrogate the mystery of value rather than representing the mystery of value. So it was impossible to actually represent value. And that was therefore translated in very specific accounting techniques. And here I have one example from the Jesuits. So what made numbers good? So in what way accounting techniques were supposed to be valid and good in late medieval and early modern times compared to what happens today? So the Jesuits were crazy about double entry. So they use double entry like nowadays we want to use artificial intelligence and big data. So from the very beginning of the establishment of their houses and colleges, they started to use double entry, not because there was an economic need for rational administration. In fact, when the Jesuits were kicked out from Italy in 1767, the Bourbons went back to simple entry to administer the wealth of the Jesuits. So there was not a technical or rational or functional or economic issue for which double entry was used. There was a much more profound reason for which double entry was used, and that is linked to the fact that the accounting that they developed was very much close to rhetoric. So, as I said, they were crazy for this new technology of visualization, I would say. But they were not fooled by numbers. They were quite different from Dilbert in a sense. And so if you look at a cash account, and if you look at that visualization, you would think that a cash account is all about money. So there is money that goes in on one side and money that goes out on the other side. And so that every transaction which is recorded into that account has got a financial nature. It relates to monetary issues. The Jesuits were too smart to believe that the complexity of the order could be reduced to a financial transaction. And so they devised very material solutions. This is the simplest that I can share with you today. To make sure that the complexity of the order was never forgotten. And so the cash account was operated in tandem, in relationship with the actual cash, where the cash box, where the money was kept. The cash box had two keys. One that was kept by the procurator of the college, who was the spokesperson for financial matters, and one that was kept by the rector of the college, who was the spokesperson for everything that was not financial. So the fact that these two people had to meet in order to cash or to spend money had some material effects. The first one is that this was a material solution to make sure that these people talk to each other. So there was the finance guy on one side, and there was the other person on the other side who was responsible for the religious, for the pedagogical, for the missionary, for the political, for whatever was not finance of the college. And therefore, every financial transaction had to be discussed with someone who was a spokesperson for non-financial matters. So that in that space between the two keys, or that space between the two keys became a mysterious space of interrogation. And so without this material solution, you would tend to believe that cash was simply a financial matter. But cash is never a financial matter, and they devised a technical and material solution to make sure not only that these two people communicated, not only that they explored the purpose of what they were doing, the morality of what they were doing, but also to make sure that everything that was financial was explored from a non-financial point of view. There are two important things of this point. The first one is that the Jesuits did not develop a form of substantial rationality. So saying, these are the list of cases in which it's good or bad to spend or to cash money. They developed a procedural rationality, which means that they developed procedures in order to explore when it was good or bad to spend money without defining upfront when this was good or bad, without defining upfront criteria of goodness or of morality. Because one thing is to operate in Rome, one thing is to operate in Latin America, one thing is to operate in Japan. The famous phrase, a Jesuit could be a black pope in Rome, but a Mandarin in China. So that was a way of making sure that their rationality was procedural and unfolding. So making sure that you do not fixate your morality, you separate your means from your ends, and you use your means, money, in order to interrogate the mystery of your purpose, or what your order and ordering is about. The second thing that is possibly more interesting for the theme of the discussion today is that they counted what could be represented in order to interrogate what cannot be counted. So dealing with environmental issues are very complex issues. And therefore, we cannot reduce them to numbers, but we can use numbers in order to interrogate that complexity and that ambiguity. The Jesuits did that very well already in the 16th and 17th century. This attitude, which is a very Catholic attitude, the idea of seeing even the economics as a discipline that deals with mystery, it's intrinsically Catholic, and I will mention another example in a moment. And I do remember, I do study religious organizations, but I'm not a particular religious person. I'm trained as a Catholic, being Italian. So being a Catholic, although I'm not a Catholic, being a Catholic is part of my culture and way of seeing things. And I remember when I was, when I joined Edinburgh a few years ago, I invited Graham Ward, who is the Regius Professor of Divinity at Christchurch, my old college at Oxford, and he gave a fantastic talk on the history of economics, from the Old Testament until Adam Smith. Very eloquent, much more eloquent than what I'm doing here today. But it was a very clear and simple message there. Economics has been, until Adam Smith, has always been a religious practice because it interrogates the mystery of value. It loses grace the moment in which this mystery is reduced to utility and then market price. And I thought in that moment, which was a Friday afternoon, 10 to 6, I thought that I became religious. Because if being religious means to interrogate the mystery of things, every individual researcher is religious. Catholic accounting is intrinsically religious in that sense, because it does interrogate the mystery of value. And this is another example which is it's much more contemporary. This relates to IRI. IRI is the Istituto per la Ricostruzione Industriale. It was funded by Mussolini under the fascist regime, but then used after the end of the Second World War to administer the funds of the Marshall Plan in Italy. It's interesting that the story is very complex. I could do just a talk on this case, but I'll try to make it short. So there were quite a few people attached to IRI. In particular, one guy was called Paronetto. Paronetto, who is a very unknown figure even to Italian people, I recently discovered was a quite interesting agent to diffuse the Catholic idea of common good into professional practices, including accounting. So Paronetto was the vice president of IRI, and to give you an idea of how IRI was important, I'll give you an example of what, in a 6-volume history of this company that now is published, we have a chapter on it. One author says to show the importance of this company. So if you were a tourist who wanted to travel to Italy in the 1950s or 1960s, you would go to Italy either by boat from the Americas or by plane if you flew from Europe. The transatlantic would very likely be the Michelangelo. Michelangelo was built by Fincantieri, that was owned by IRI. If you flew with Alitalia, which by the way stands for always late in taking off, always late in approaching, Alitalia was owned by IRI. Then you land at Fiumicino Airport, you hire Alfa Romeo Duetto, the car of the Dolce Vita, and Alfa Romeo was owned by IRI. Then you take the motorway from Rome to Milan, the A1, so the longest, most sophisticated and first motorway in Europe. That was built by Autostrade, that was owned by IRI. Then you go to the hotel in Milan, and you make a phone call to your relatives wherever they are. You call with a phone which is owned by SIP, and SIP also owned the network of communication, and SIP was owned by IRI. The problem started to arise the moment in which you go downstairs, you buy a panettone, and Motta was also owned by IRI. So IRI accounted, along with ENI, which is still operating, IRI was privatized in the 90s, and Enel, which is still there and still owned by the Treasury, accounted for several points of Italian GDP. So doing budgeting and planning at IRI, ENI, and Enel meant doing industrial policy for the whole country. When the Americans came to Italy, with the Marshall Plan, they wanted to give us money, but they also wanted to give us accounting knowledge. And so they said, okay, so this is the plan. We give you money, you use this money to turn around the company that IRI owns, and then you sell these companies on the market. And the Italians at that time, who were a bit smarter than the Italians that we have nowadays, said, oh, it's interesting. So two things. The first one is, we sell them on the market. Who is going to buy them? We don't have a market here. So that is a problem, right? The second thing is, this is how you shape your income statement. So you've got revenues, then you've got cost of goods sold, then you've got operating expenses, and then you've got net profit. That is not an income statement. That is a political statement. It tells us that the most important institution in society is the shareholder. This is not how it works here. How it works here is that we operate in the interest of the common good. And this relates back to what Silvian was referring before. And so Paronetto, along with the head of planning and budgeting, was also professor of banking at Bocconi University, pupil of the founder of Economia Aziendale, the new doctrine of accounting developed in the 20th century, was also a Catholic, along with another person who then became the Minister of Finance, Vanoni, where they were part of a group of Catholic intellectuals who developed or wrote a code that was called the Camaldoli Code, where they defined how Catholics should operate in the new world after the end of the war. So they knew already in 1940 that the fascist regime would have collapsed. They knew already in 1943 that the Americans would have won the war. And they knew all of that because Paronetto was very close to the Vatican. He was an advisor of Giovanni Battista Montini, that if I say this name doesn't mean anything to you, but if I say Paul VI, it does may mean something to you. So he was very close to the top-level hierarchy of the Vatican. And these three people, interestingly enough, were from the same village, Morbegno, in the north of Italy, and they were all relatives. So Saraceno, the head of planning and budgeting, was a cousin of Vanoni, or actually, no, it was the brother-in-law of Vanoni, and Paronetto was a cousin of Saraceno. So three people from the same village, all very strong Catholic, all very close to the Vatican, organizing a series of meetings where Aldo Moro, Giulio Andreotti, and a few other people, including Alcide De Gasperi, the first Prime Minister of Italy, were thinking already from 1940, what should we do as Catholics once the war is ended and a new world will need to be designed. And so when the Americans came to Italy, they were already ready to propose practical solution to interrogate the mystery of common good. And common good was indeed defined as Silvian said before. So the common good was those series of conditions that could allow individuals to pursue their own personal interests. And so it was a nice combination of pursuing your individual free will, but make sure that that free will is constrained by the fact that others will have to pursue their own free will. And so after a few years of negotiation, they came out with a different format for the planning and budgeting at IRI, in order to govern societies, and using Bruno Latour words, societies. I mean, how to govern the links, the ties between the members of a community, knowing that in the contemporary world, most of these ties are actually financial. And so they came out with the idea of an income statement based on value added rather than profit. So you produce the value added as the difference between the revenues and all the production factors that have to be transformed in order to generate these revenues, so basically raw material and natural materials. And then this value added is distributed amongst equals, in a sense. Employees through salaries, banks through interest, state through income taxes, shareholders through dividends, and indeed the firm through return earnings, because the firm became the institute where the compromise between the production and the distribution of value added was achieved, but also the compromise in the distribution of this value added was performed. So in this sense, this new format of profit and loss that was also used for national accounting, so that everything could flow up and down from the level of the state down to the level of the firm, and the productivity of the firm was based on value added. And it was an instrument to mediate between the production and the distribution of value, but it was also an instrument to generate social order and economic development. Because when they were doing planning and budgeting, and when they had to plan for the next year or for the years ahead, in terms of producing value, in terms of how to generate these revenues, they had to interrogate themselves: how do we do this? Do we do this with infrastructure? Do we do this with services? Do we do this with nuclear? Do we do this with foreign trade? How do we generate revenues? And where do we do this? Do we do it in the north, or do we do it in the south? Do we do it in Puglia? Do we do it in Campania? Or do we do it in Milan? When the Americans came, the most obvious thing to do from an economic, rational perspective would have been to invest the funds of the Marshall Plan in the north. But this was against the idea of the common good, because it would have not balanced the difference between the north and the south of Italy. And this is why people like Saraceno, the head of planning and budgeting, founded SBIMEZ, the Institute for the Development of the Mezzogiorno, in order to balance the difference, the economic difference, but also the cultural, I'm not sure actually, but let's say the economic difference between the north and the south. So this instrument was not an instrument of representation, it was an instrument of interrogation. And again, similar to the Jesuits, it's a means to interrogate your ends. Why are we doing this? Are we doing this for making money? No, we're not doing this for making money. Means and ends are not the same thing. I use money in order to pursue common good, in order to pursue something which is obscure. And then, of course, once you have generated this value, you interrogate yourself on how to distribute it. And you change the ontology of some of the people that you are distributing this wealth to. Here, employees are not a cost. They are not a resource to be sacrificed and squeezed. They are a resource to be remunerated. So you change the ontology of things. So I think it's important to say, because these visualizations, I don't call them representations anymore. These visualizations, they have an agency. I mean, depending on how you structure very mundane things like an account, you have a different view of society. You have a different notion of what is good. Just using in our contemporary world this format of income statement compared to the statement that the IFRS prescribes would immediately show issues of inequality. But because we have a different format, we cannot see them. Now, if you compare this to the conventional Anglo-American format of the income statement, you would immediately see how that income statement ignores entirely society, but also the environment. So here you have an income statement where, I don't know whether there is a pointer here. Anyway, you would see how the format is generated in a way that is thought to make sure that you understand how the different functions in the firm contribute to the generation of profit, because there is a difference between ownership and management of the firm. And so in that way, in that sense, this format originates from the first industrial revolution and marks the distinction between functional managers, manufacturing, administrative, finance, and shareholders who delegate to them the management of the firm. And therefore, they want to measure how the activity of these managers is in relation to the pursuit of the aim which is given, and it is the generation of profit. But it doesn't work anymore here. I don't know why it doesn't. Let's see what I can do. Oh, okay. No. So maybe now this works, but the slides don't work anymore. It's maybe it's frozen.
If you click on the pointer.
Oh, okay. Oh, back. Okay, so the statement, in fact, ignores entirely the social dimension of the production and distribution of value, and it assumes, as I've said earlier, that salaries are a resource to be squeezed, not to be remunerated at the same level of capital or the role of the state, for instance. Now, it would be relatively simple to modify this statement, and this is what with Clement and Alexander we've been working, in order to recognize, so to modify the value-added statement, in order to recognize the fact that when we produce and distribute value, we remunerate all the other factors apart from nature. So we take, in order to generate revenues, we take material resources from the earth, from the planet, but we don't give anything back. We give back to capital, we give back to worker, to labor, we give back to the state, we give that back to the banks, but we don't give back to nature. So it would be relatively easy to introduce a provision below the line of the production of value added in order to accumulate resources into a reserve that eventually will be given back to nature. And is this a way of measuring things? No, it is a way of interrogating, what our relations as humans is with Mother Earth. And also, unlike the other approaches to environmental accounts where they use metrics which are non-monetary. I mean, think about CO2 emissions and these things that people care but may not care enough. This actually uses money. So we have to discuss amongst ourselves how much money are we willing to forgo or to renounce. How much money do we want to renounce in order to reconstitute the natural resources that we have consumed for our own benefit and for our own sake? So it will force a debate on how adverse or how predatory our behavior is in relation to nature. Similar to the Jesuits, uses things that you can count in order to interrogate things that you cannot count. So you use monetary values, things that you can count, in order to address issues which are very complex, but that needs to be addressed. And of course, it forces a compromise between humans and nature. Humans who exploit natural resources, and nature which provide humans with such resources. So again, going back to history, recent history or even more ancient history, late medieval, early modern times, shifting the way in which we view accounting from an instrument of representation and measurement to an instrument of judgment and interrogation of ambiguity, mystery, and uncertainty helps us to deal with some of the greatest and most important issues that we are facing nowadays, inequality and environmental issues. Figures have a history too, not only we can, because with the crazy speed at which we go, people nowadays do not even look at numbers. They look at figures. They look at diagrams. They look at dashboards and things of this nature. And we tend to forget that most of the business visualizations that we use nowadays, balance scorecard, Excel, spreadsheets, strategy maps, histograms, graphs, they also have a history and a genealogy. So they are not, they're not been invented yesterday. They've been invented a long time ago. I'll mention just one of those because I think it's quite an interesting example. An Excel spreadsheet. The genealogy of that organization into cells, into loci, into topois, again brings us back to rhetoric, and in particular to rhetorical machines, to macchine rhetoriche. Rhetorical machines, they were called rhetorical machines because machina in Latin means crane. And so a rhetorical machine was a crane to build and rebuild knowledge and interrogate the mystery of God, interrogate the mystery of value, interrogate the mystery of your morality. This is an Excel spreadsheet that comes with an Harvard Business School case on the Airbus A380. Given that we're in France, I think it's quite appropriate. Everyone knows by now that the Airbus A380 is a wonderful piece of engineering, but it's an awful financial investment, because there are only two companies in the world that manage to make money with the Airbus by flying the Airbus A380, because in order for the A380 to make money, it needs to fly more than 9 hours at full capacity. And not many companies can fly more than 9 hours at full capacity. So a wonderful machine, but not a great investment. Now, if I give this Excel spreadsheet to inexperienced program managers, I do teach program management quite a lot these days. So if I give it to undergraduates or to people with have 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 years of experience in program management, they will inevitably, all of them, say, by working on the red cells and doing scenario plannings and changing all the variables, all of them will inevitably say that the NPV, the net present value of this investment, is positive, and therefore it's important to invest in the A380. If I give it to a very experienced manager, he or she would not even look at this Excel spreadsheet. So what does this Excel spreadsheet do to the young students who use it? It forces them to focus their attention on what is on the sheet, not on what it is not on the sheet. This is, interestingly, against the idea of why the grid was designed in the first place. The grid was a rhetorical machine, and I said that rhetoric and the art of memory are linked to each other. So when you have to give a speech, you have instruments to persuade the audience, but also you have instruments to remember your speech. And if you are a good writer, or if you are a good orator, sometimes you are paid for talking about things that you do not know. Okay? And so there were techniques to make sure that you could explore the unknown, that you could explore what you did not know. One of these was the grid. So there were rules. So take a piece of paper and draw lines vertically and horizontally. And then if your objective, like in this case, is to remember your speech, you talk about the premise, the narration, how you divide the speech, then to confirm your argument, to prove again your argument, and the conclusions. So it gives you a timeline, okay? But if instead the idea was to invent knowledge, so to interrogate the unknown, the idea was this. So draw this line vertically and horizontally, and then assign to each line a grammatical dimension. So who, what, when, why, whether, and so forth and so on. Then take an object that you have to talk about. Let's assume I know nothing about this iPhone, okay? But I have to give a talk about this iPhone. Let's assume I'm Mariana Mazzucato, okay? Who has got this multi-million viewer TED talk on how the state is actually important in the technological innovation of the iPhone, not Apple. So take the object and make it fluctuate above this grid and start to make connection between the unknown, so you do not know what this is all about, and what you actually know, which are the grammatical dimensions. Again, use something to know in order to interrogate something that you do not know, the mystery. And start to say, who made it? Apple. Why is it made? Oh, it was made as a phone, but actually it has become many other things. So this thing, again, like the bottle, has the tendency to become what it was not. This is why it's so powerful. When it is used, why it is used, who uses it, whether it is used or not. And so you start to make these relationships. So you can organize your talk. Third rule, but be careful. Never let the object to fall into the cell, into the grid, because otherwise this becomes a commonplace. You start to believe that this is actually a phone. And so you limit the heuristic ability of the grid, which is an instrument to interrogate the unknown and the possibility of this unknown to become something else. So paradoxically, we now use the grid, we use rhetorical machines only for reducing things, not to augment our understanding of what we do not know. And so in rhetoric, there is a combination of reduction and augmentation, while in modernity, we only focus on reduction. We think that we can analyze sentiments, with tweets, or we think that we can deal with uncertainty through risk matrices, or we think that we can reduce values to numbers, and indeed, nature to CO2 emissions. While, of course, nature is much more complex than that. And so we do the reduction, but we don't do the augmentation. And when we design accounting systems, but also accounting visualizations, we do the reduction, but we don't do the augmentation. While in the past, they did both the reduction and the augmentation, because the aim of these visualizations was not representation, but was interrogation. And this can happen in figures too. How much time do you have, Clement? Okay, so I'll skip a couple of slides, but I'll do this one. I would like to take questions. So this is a dashboard that has been used to manage London Heathrow Terminal 2, so the construction of London Heathrow Terminal 2. If you do major program management, you would know that it's quite rare that a large investment project like an airport will be delivered on time and on budget. It's actually quite the opposite. Every single investment is always delayed, and it always costs more. But there are two terminals, London Heathrow Terminal 5 and London Heathrow Terminal 2, which have been delivered on time and on budget, unless you were a traveler on the day in which London Heathrow T5 opened, because all the luggages were lost for a week. But with an investment of £5.2 billion, a week of disruption for the luggages is not a big deal. Look at what is happening in Berlin, for instance, with the new airport, and the comparison is quite impressive. So they use this. They use many different visualizations, but this attracted my attention quite a lot. So they had a dashboard, where they had 4 areas. One was about schedule, one was about cost, one was about risk, one was about safety. So what was the principle of design behind this dashboard? Why these 4 things and not other 4? Why 4 and not 3? Why 4 and not 5? Why 4 and not 10? And so I think that they indeed used very Jesuit principles without knowing. The first principle that they used was division. And if I write division in this way, you will see the word in a radically different way. Because division means, D means 2 things. It means it comes from de or from this. De means to be about. So a division is about seeing things, but video in Latin does not only mean to see things, it also means to imagine things, to interrogate the future. And also it means this: if you want to imagine the future well, split the thing into opposites. And here you have tons of opposites which are in a continuous state of tension, because if you pursue schedule, you can kill people. So if you want to go faster, you can kill people because that is a dangerous task. If you want to save money, you can kill people too. If you want to save people, it will cost you a lot. If you want to go faster, your risk will increase. If you want to cover your risk, your money will have to be there, and it will not be there because it's impossible to cover all of your risks. So exactly like the Jesuits, you create 2 opposites, like in rhetoric. So in order to interrogate the mystery of the space in between, and you do that in order to put 2 things in tension, to explore the ambiguity and the uncertainty and the religious mystery in between these 2 things. So in the example of the Jesuit cash, the procurator, the equivalent of the contemporary CFO, is not aligned with the CEO. They are put on the same line in order to question the purpose of the order. And the program manager, so the person who is managing the 4 people who are responsible for these 4 areas, has to be in the middle, absolutely Jesuitically, I would say, indifferent. This Pope Francis, is the first Jesuit Pope in the history of the Catholic Church, because the Jesuits are soldiers at the service of the Pope. They take 4 vows. The 4th is obedience to the Pope. So they cannot become popes. So this is the first time that a Pope is a Jesuit. And what does Francis do when he comes out at St. Peter's Square, the moment in which the Holy Spirit chose him? He does 3 rhetorical things, which are very Jesuit in a crescendo, I would say. The first thing addresses the masses with a very colloquial address. Buonasera. Doesn't say cari fedeli. No, it's a very colloquial. Buonasera. I'm not above you. I'm not below you. I'm at the same level of you. So we're in a state of tension there. The second thing, he uses pathos, and he says the church, and he launches a very strong political message. The church is in trouble, and what does the Holy Spirit do? He goes far away to find someone who could save it. People think Argentina is Argentinian. He meant institutionally far away. It has never been the case that a pope is a Jesuit. Third thing, super Jesuit. Let's have a few moments of silence, and you pray for me. So you create silence, absence, nothing, a negative space, and you project into this negative space what you think the church is going to be. I'm not going to tell you. For me, that was a kind of epiphany moment, because I've been studying the Jesuits since I was a kid, really, and I always thought that their motto, perinde ac cadavere esset, so to be indifferent when you have to make decisions, was a very cynical attitude. In that moment, I understood that it was not cynical at all. The only way in which I can try to evangelize all of you and to be close to all of you is to be indifferent. in the middle of difference. And so rather than communicating a given message, I create a space of communication which, because it's negative, because it's mysterious, because it's silence, becomes holy space of communication. And communication and communion indeed share the same root. So the only way in which you can deal with ambiguity, the only way in which you can deal with uncertainty is, and the mystery of value, if we move to accounting, is to design practices and visualizations which are indeed indifferent, in order to make sure that you are open to the difference rather than trying to kill it. And this applies very much to nature too. I'll skip the stuff on polyfocality, varietas, and curiositas because we are late. And again, what they did at London Heathrow Terminal 2 is to count what can be represented. I can count, how many trucks come in, I can count the accidents, but to interrogate what cannot be counted, which is the ambiguity of this huge project that could be, pulled into many directions. And this is what leads to rationality. Again, if I write rationality in this way, would you see the word in a different way? You have ratio as the origin, the etymological origin of rationality. Ratio in Latin does not mean reason, interestingly. It means proportion and it means account. So when you want to make a rational decision, you have to be proportionate, you have to be balanced, you have to be in a state of symmetry, you have to be indifferent. Forget about maximization or minimization. These things are actually irrational, they're not rational. So rational choices are impossible, but reasonable choices are possible. Only if we go back to the history of those practices that have led now us to believe that we can be rational in a neoclassical sense. And this is why I've been talking about the need to move from viewing visualizations, accounting as answer machines, as oracles. I mean, Oracle, the ERP system is called Oracle because you interrogate the Oracle and the Oracle gives you an answer. Invest or not to invest. This is right, this is wrong. This is not why accounting was invented in the first place. Accounting was invented to interrogate your morality, to make sure that you have got some means to interrogate your ends without defining what your ends were. And this is why we have to move towards myotic machines, machines that raise the right questions. And given that I'm getting fixated with Netflix, but also with an Italian director, Paolo Sorrentino, who interrogates the mystery in all of his films, the mystery of beauty, the mystery of power, the mystery of love, and the mystery of God in a HBO series, which is, the young Pope and now the new Pope. And this is Jude Law in the last episode of the new Pope, who says these words: "You know what is so beautiful about questions? It is that we don't have the answers. In the end, only God has the answers. God's secrets, which only He knows, that is the mystery in which we believe." So the mystery as a core of our conduct, not certainty, not representation, but humility, the fact that we cannot know things and therefore we have to devise practices that help us to interrogate that mystery. You may be religious or not, but the morality of this message is very strong. And that is the mystery that guides our conscience. Not faith in truth, in absolute truth, but faith in mystery, in the impossibility of knowing, which is the only way, the only reason for which we need representations, need to present things again. To quote Latour again, inscription speaks of the world in its absence. It is never there. We interrogate the mystery of things. For those who do not want to read academic boring stuff, I've got two more colloquial things that you can look at. But I've been discussing these things also in academic papers, which are on my website if you are interested. And I like to close this talk with the words of Enrico Fermi, who is the father of nuclear physics, who goes to Stockholm with his wife, who was Jewish during the fascist regime to win the Nobel Prize for physics, and then never goes back to Italy and goes to Princeton to lead the Manhattan Project that led to the construction of the nuclear bomb. So to fight fascism, what he does is to, build a nuclear bomb, which also speaks to the fact that what Andreotti or Sorrentino in his films says. Sometimes, in order to pursue the common good, you have to do very bad things. So maybe talking about common good, Fermi is the right person to close this talk. At the end of the conference, he was asked by a journalist, have we clarified the mystery of nuclear? What is nuclear physics? And he responds, no, we are still very confused, but at a much higher level. And so I hope that after this, we are still very confused, because confusion is the only thing that can lead our morality. Certainty only makes it decay. So thank you very much, and open to questions now.